Tonight, we drift into the shadowed veins of Harlem, where the pavement still carries an old rhythm under its skin. The night air hums, bass lines leaking from car windows, arguments and laughter spilling from bodega doors, and somewhere beneath it all, the stubborn echo of a name that refuses to stay buried. Alpo Martinez. It's the late 1980s, and Harlem isn't sleeping. It's stalking the night. Neon signs buzz against worn brick, sneaker soles slap concrete, and eyes dart over shoulders in quick, nervous glances. But only a rare few carry that fear like a badge. Alpo does, though on him it's stitched. In velvet, he doesn't walk down the street. He glides, moving with a smoothness that makes the streetlights seem to pause for him. As if he were born beneath the glowing marquee with bold letters flashing, trouble with a side of charm. The stories you'll hear tonight, some are truth, some are stretched thin like old fabric, and a few, well, they'll make you wonder why anyone thinks ghosts keep quiet. Alpo's legend doesn't just speak, it boasts, and in Harlem, talking too much can kill you quicker than a bullet. So, before we take another step, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe if you genuinely enjoy these journeys, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time the clock reads for you right now. I read them all. Now, dim your lights, let a fan hum in the corner, and sink into this story with me. Back then, teenaged Alpo wasn't tall, but the way he carried himself gave the illusion of height, head bobbing to an internal rhythm only. He could hear. His starter jacket caught the glow of street lamps, and a gold chain swung in time with his laugh, always loud, always lingering. People remember the sound. Not just a laugh, but a declaration. School was already in his rearview mirror, not on paper, but in spirit. He still showed up some days at Washington Career and Technical Education, high school, but he wasn't there. For lessons, he was scanning the hallways. Every corner whispered opportunity, a small pill, a rolled joint, a deal in the making, the first rung on a ladder that didn't end in college. Teachers would sigh when they spotted him. Some shook their heads. One told him straight, "You're going to end up dead or locked up, kid." He'd just smile. That's what they always said, right? While most teenagers swerved away from danger, Alpo winked at it, maybe bought it a soda. Risk wasn't something he feared, it was something he branded. When others were working on their jump shots, he was studying faces, learning the small tells that could mean survival. When others dreamed of scholarships, he was watching who arrived late to the block and why. Harlem was his classroom, and the streets his textbooks. By 13, he had rules. Never carry too much, never stay in one place too long, never meet the wrong eyes for too long. He wasn't the biggest, but he was fast in thought, in speech, in action. That dirt bike he rode wasn't just for show, it was training. Training for the times when sirens were too close for comfort. His role models didn't sit behind desks or wear judicial robes. They rolled through in foreign cars, leather coats like armor, gold glinting under the streetlights. Some didn't make it to 25. Alpo didn't flinch when they fell. He just took notes, storing each lesson in a mental ledger no one else could read. One block over, the real business was exploding. Crack had carved its way into Harlem's bones, changing everything. Basements turned into laboratories. Building steps became trading floors. Boys barely old enough to drive carried shoeboxes stuffed with cash and pistols where their textbooks used to be. Alpo started small. Errands dropped this off, hold that bag, no questions. But while his hands moved, his mind recorded everything. The streets don't reward the loud, they reward the ones who listen. And Alpo listened. When he did speak, he spoke big. His voice was his product. His words climbed ladders faster than his feet did. People started saying his name, not because of what he had done, but because of what they thought he might have done. By 16, he wasn't a runner anymore. He was managing, recruiting, building a name. His clothes changed, sharper cuts, brighter colors. He borrowed shine from older hustlers and reflected it back with a new edge. Charisma became his currency. Unpredictability his brand. Did he understand the danger? Probably, but like so many before him, he thought he'd be the exception. The one who could outrun the math, stay off the obituary pages, never whisper to a Fed. Spoiler, he was wrong. But for now, he was still just a teenager with a dirt bike and a grin that could freeze traffic. Some swear they saw him one summer day near 124th Street, riding a wheelie between stoplights, gold chain bouncing, laughter echoing over the noise. Of the city, people watched and thought the same thing. That boy's going to be somebody, just not the kind you wanted blocking your car at midnight. Money started speaking to him early, first in murmurs, crumpled bills from backroom deals, quick handoffs in stairwells, then in shouts, thick rolls wrapped in rubber bands, envelopes heavy with cash. He listened, not just because he wanted it, but because he knew what it did. The bigger the pile, the louder the name. And his name, Alpo Martinez, rolled off tongues with a mix of envy and caution. By now, he had his own crew. Younger guys, some barely old enough to shave, loyal because loyalty paid, and dangerous because disloyalty didn't. They worked in silence, but his name traveled faster than any of them. It was Harlem, 1986. Crack was the new gold. Violence ended sentences. The streets were crowded with contenders, but Alpo moved differently. He didn't stake out a stoop all day. He was mobile, an empire on wheels. His cars were loud, candy-colored, sliding through neighborhoods like moving trophies. His product had a reputation, and for him, it was never just about the quality. It was about the presentation. He was selling more than drugs. He was selling Alpo Dot, the sharp haircut, the Cuban link, the fan of bills in a Polaroid. That was the dream, and like any dream worth selling, it came with a price. The old heads muttered that kids like him burned too hot, too fast. But in those days, Alpo wasn't listening to warnings. He was listening to the hum of Harlem under his wheels, and the sound of his own name, bouncing back from the brick walls. Even his enemies know better than to say it to his face, because for all the noise Alpo makes, he has a way of commanding silence on demand. A single nod, a lingering glance, and someone can vanish, sometimes for a few days, sometimes forever. Behind the swagger and gold chains lies a calculating mind. He knows exactly who to slip cash to, who to steer clear of, and who to win over with charm. Alpo is part showman, part predator, the kind of street figure who can turn chaos into choreography. But he isn't walking this path alone. That's where Rich Porter comes in. If Alpo's presence is gasoline, Rich is the spark that sets it ablaze. Together, they're more than partners, they're an event. Alpo brings the flash and bravado, Rich brings the smooth talk and quiet assurance. Where one struts, the other glides. Together, they make Harlem feel like it's theirs for the taking. Rich has the family connections, uncles, cousins, a steady pipeline of product, and an air of legitimacy. Alpo has the speed, the daring, the volume. when they join forces. It's like a brand launch. To the streets, it's raw power. To law enforcement, it's public enemy number one. Their influence spreads fast. Entire blocks bow to their control. What once took decades to build is now rising in months. Everybody sees it. Rivals, informants, and the feds. But for the moment, the money never stops flowing. The phones never stop ringing, and Alpo's pockets never stop feeling heavy. It's worth remembering the scale. In 1986, at the height of the crack epidemic, Harlem's underground economy rivaled its legitimate one. Millions moved every week in street-level exchanges. At the center of that whirlwind were young men like Alpo, sharp, fearless, and for a while untouchable. But that kind of shine comes with shadows. The more you have, the more someone wants to take it. And sometimes, they don't just want the money, they want you gone. Still, Alpo never flinches. He buys more bikes, more outfits. He throws cash at problems and grins through storms. Too. The public, he looks untouchable. To those who whisper otherwise, he simply drowns them out with more spectacle. One story from this era has cemented itself in his legend. People say that during a police chase, Alpo launched his dirt bike onto the hood of a squad car, laughed in the officer's face, and disappeared into an alley before they could react. Maybe it happened. Maybe it didn't. Either way, the story spreads, and the myth grows. But a question lingers: if he had stayed quiet, moved carefully, kept his head low, could he have weathered the coming storm? Or was his downfall sealed the moment he decided? Being seen was more important than surviving. Because here's the truth: the drugs weren't the only danger. The spotlight was. And Alpo was hooked on it. If Harlem had yearbooks, his page would read, most likely to be watched. Not just by cops, but by corner kids, shop owners, and mothers leaning out of their windows with cigarettes and suspicion. He's a walking contradiction. Street smart but reckless, calculated yet impulsive, loyal until it gets in the way. But before the betrayals, before the courtrooms and the gunshots, there's just the boy. Let's rewind. Long before his name was in rap lyrics, in headlines, or whispered in true crime documentaries, Alberto was simply a kid from East Harlem, born to Puerto Rican parents, raised on 112th Street, Spanish at home, English sharpened on sidewalks. His mother worked hard, protective in ways that might have been too much or not nearly enough. Depending on who you ask, he had more energy than most classrooms could handle. Teachers remembered him as the kid always working an angle, not just selling candy, but running little supply and demand operations. One story claims a teacher once confiscated 5 packs of gum, 2 joints, and a stash of cassette tapes from him in a single day. Maybe that happened, maybe it didn't. But with Alpo, the space between truth and exaggeration is razor-thin. He learned the unwritten codes early: eye contact, timing, posture, when to joke, when to vanish. These weren't in any textbook. In Harlem, they were survival currency. His first taste of real profit wasn't about the cash itself. It was about the reaction, the way someone would hand over bills and walk away satisfied. That thrill, that acknowledgement, became his addiction. Many hustlers grind for comfort. Alpo grinds for an audience. By junior high, he's more of a ghost than a student. He drifts further from classmates and closer to corner crews. The lunchroom is replaced by bodegas. Comics give way to counting scales, yet there's still traces of a kid under all that ambition. One story floats around about how he skipped an important drop just to take a girl to the movies. She remembers the red bomber jacket, the smile. The way he bought every snack at the concession stand like a superstar. She thought it was charming. Later, she heard darker rumors about where that same jacket ended up. The next week, whispers about blood and about silence. Nothing ever confirmed. In these early years, one of his strongest talents begins to show: recruitment. People don't just work for Alpo. They want to be part of his orbit. It's not just about the money. He makes them feel seen, important. That's a dangerous kind of charisma. Loyalty built too fast can burn out just as quickly. But for now, his circle is solid. He builds a crew of runners, lookouts, and couriers. He trains them how to avoid attention, how to blend in, how to talk their way out of trouble. He's not just a boss, he's a coach, and it pays off. By 17, his name carries weight. Not the cold weight of fear, but the kind of fame that clears paths and turns heads. The kind of name that walks into a room before you do. But fame leaves footprints. The more people say your name, the easier it is to follow. The NYPD is starting to do just that. No arrests yet, but they're watching. Meanwhile, Alpo moves like a shadow with teeth. At parties, he's the center of gravity. Money flows from his hands like it's nothing. Behind closed doors, he starts talking with older, established figures. Men with reach, men with networks. They see not just ambition, but hunger wrapped in silk, the kind that could devour a city if it isn't stopped. And hunger, in Harlem, always comes at a price. By the mid-1980s, New York City's drug war was in full swing. The streets buzzed with tension as Operation Pressure Point flooded entire neighborhoods with an almost constant police presence. Patrol cars rolled by every few minutes, plainclothes officers blended into the corners, and raids became as common as corner hustlers. Arrest rates shot through the roof. Crews that had once run together were splintering apart under the pressure. Trust dissolving as quickly as their alliances. Yet somehow, in the middle of that chaos, Alpo kept rising. It was as if he had a sixth sense for survival, an uncanny ability to know exactly when to step back into the shadows and when to make himself the center of attention. People still debate whether things might have been different if someone had pulled him aside early on, shown him another path, maybe even mentored him toward something outside the streets. But then again, maybe that was never in the cards. By this point, Alpo had crossed into territory there was no coming back from. He wasn't just playing the game anymore, he was rewriting the playbook. His presence made the streets louder, more daring. The older generation shook their heads, muttering about the new breed that didn't respect the old codes. But the younger ones, they were captivated. They followed him without hesitation. In a world where rules felt paper-thin, charm became the new law, and Alpo had charm in surplus. That's where Rich Porter entered the picture. Not just a business decision, but a pivotal moment. One look between them was enough to spark the realization. Together, they could run the entire neighborhood. Harlem was more than just a grid of streets. It was its own living, breathing ecosystem. And like predators in the wild, the most dominant players recognized each other before anyone else did. Rich was different from Alpo, smooth, deliberate, and unshakably confident. His clothes were crisp, his demeanor calm, his words measured. It always seemed like he was a few steps ahead, solving problems before they became visible. If Alpo was fire, Rich was ice. Together, they created steam, unstoppable, forceful, and leaving an impression everywhere they went. their partnership played out like a scene from a movie. Late-night meetings in parked cars, strategic conversations whispered over the hum of engines and meticulously coordinated drops that ran like clockwork. They moved with precision and style. Dirt bikes lined up on side streets like an army's cavalry, custom jackets marking their crew like a uniform. To Harlem, they weren't just hustlers. They were celebrities. The word spread fast. Rich and Alpo became both a brand and a warning. Rich brought the solid connections, family ties, trust from older players, and an uncle named Johnny who had deep reach in the trade, with supply lines stretching all the way to Philadelphia. That pipeline was reliable and untouchable. Alpo brought the energy, the personality, the ability to sell the dream as much as the product. If Rich was distribution, Alpo was marketing. The empire grew almost faster than they could keep track of it. Their reach spread from 125th to 145th, stretching from St. Nicholas to Lexington. Each block felt like a small kingdom under their watch, and the profits were staggering. Thousands became tens of thousands, and before long, they were making more in a week than most people could dream of earning in 10 years. And they weren't even in their 20s yet. It wasn't just about the drugs. There were lavish gifts, legendary parties, and nightclub appearances that looked like they were straight from glossy magazine spreads. Women were drawn in by more than the money. They were attracted to the aura, the mythology. Just saying their names seemed like it might bring a little of that glow. But perfection has a short shelf life on the streets. Everyone knew, even if they didn't want to say it out loud, that a rise this fast came with a built-in expiration date. Still, for a time, they were untouchable. Alpo's red Toyota became as famous as he was. With tinted windows and a sound system powerful enough to make whole stoops vibrate, the car announced his arrival before anyone even saw him. He leaned out the driver's side window like he had nothing to fear, like the ending didn't matter. Rich, by contrast, stayed composed. He still dressed sharply, but kept his words guarded. His little brother, William, followed him closely, and Rich made sure to keep him safe, always watchful. That protective streak was rare in their world, which only made what was coming down the line feel even heavier. Then another rumor takes shape, heavier than all the rest. Word is, Alpo might be considering cooperation. That one word, cooperation, carries a sharp edge. It's a door opener in federal buildings, but a death sentence in the streets. Informant, rat, snitch. The labels drip like poison. At first, people dismiss it. Not Alpo, not the man who carried himself like a king, who laughed in the face of threats. But behind closed doors, the talk is real. The charges are steep life without parole, an eternity of concrete and steel. He starts to do the math, slowly, over days that stretch into weeks. Names are mentioned, timelines are reviewed, deals are hinted at. He starts offering details to the feds, some truth, some twisted, some so precise they breathe life into cases that had been cold for years. The agents listened closely. Alpo wasn't just a player, he was a strategist. He knew who moved what, who held the keys, who cleaned up the aftermath, and, most importantly, who could still be touched by the law. Piece by piece, his information turns into action. Arrests are made, trials are built, convictions stack up. Some go down guilty, others maybe just close enough to be caught in the blast. And for his part, he gets the trade-off: less time, protection, relocation. The alphabet soup of federal programs. It's no longer speculation. Alpo flips. In the record books of the 1990s drug war, his cooperation becomes one of the most talked about moves, a pivot that closes major cases, especially in DC, but leaves his name scorched in the streets. Outside, the reaction spreads fast and ugly. Shock, anger, disbelief in Harlem, where his name had once been spoken like both warning and worship. There's nothing but disgust now. To many, his legend is gone. To a few, he simply did what survival demanded, because, in the end, the game almost always ends in courtrooms and compromises, and the question lingers when you choose survival over loyalty. Is it betrayal, or is it just the final play? He disappears from public view, new name, new paperwork, a life erased from the streets that once built him. But he's not gone completely. In quiet rooms, he follows the narratives, reads the coded nods in interviews, watches the documentaries twist his story into something new. The part that stings isn't the hate, it's that he's no longer the center of the legend, not the hero, not even the villain, just a cautionary footnote. And sometimes in the stillness of his new, safer cell, with better meals and no flashing cameras, he lets his mind drift back to streets that no longer speak his name except in warning, back to the roar of engines, the weight of a diamond-lined jacket, and the kind of silence that only comes before the fall. He often wonders if anyone, anywhere, still lets his name slip into a conversation. Does it still hold weight, or has it faded behind riches, drowned out by the echo of another man's legacy? And then there's the lingering question: if a man's name no longer has a home, does he? Alpo sinks into the shadows of witness protection like ink bleeding into the folds of an ancient envelope, absorbed, hidden, and permanent. His name vanishes from legal files. The court records seal shut, as if locking away a dangerous relic. The street names, the aliases, the handles he once wore like badges of honor are discarded, scattered like cigarette stubs across Harlem's cracked sidewalks. What remains is just a shell, new identity, a new address, and a silence so heavy it feels deeper than any prison solitude. They send him far north, to Maine of all places. Here, the air bites clean and sharp, the nights hum with stillness, and the local drawl twists words into something that sounds like another language altogether. For a man bred in the electric pulse of Harlem, where every siren has intention, and every corner store keeps a beat, Maine might as well be another planet. But Alpo has always been an adapter. Survival for him isn't just instinct, it's craft. Rumors in his new life are a fog. Some say he worked construction, hammer in hand, back bent to honest labor. Others whisper about a delivery job, slipping through quiet streets in an old van. A few claim he ran a small car detailing shop from a dusty rented garage. Truth is, scarce here, slippery, elusive, maybe deliberately obscured. One thing everyone agrees on: he did not vanish the way most in witness protection are told to. No scruffy beard to distort his face, no fabricated limp, no oversized sunglasses masking his eyes. He didn't hunch his shoulders or bow his head to disappear. He walked like Alpo always had, confident, deliberate, with the faint smirk of a man who has survived more than most can imagine. And that's the problem. The program was built for invisibility, but quiet has never been his natural state. Soon the locals start watching. The new guy stands out, dressing sharper than the rest, talking smoother, rolling through town on a motorcycle, while everyone else drives battered pickups. He becomes a curiosity, the subject of small-town speculation. From porches and diner counters, they watch him, coffee cooling in their hands. Stories begin to form. Some say he drops hints, little morsels of the past slipped between sentences. Not confessions, but suggestions. A grin and a muttered, "You know who I used to be," while adjusting the brakes on someone's car. A vague reference to back in the day over a beer at the local bar. True or not, the impression sticks. He becomes Maine's most visible mystery. A man whose silence makes more noise than most people's chatter. But there's an emptiness underneath. Reinventing yourself is still a kind of performance, and every performance demands an audience. Back in Harlem, his name drifts back to the surface like an oil slick breaking through calm water. Podcasts dissect his story. Rappers rhyme about him, sometimes with awe, sometimes with disdain. Documentaries recycle grainy footage of his arrest, his mugshots staring into the lens. Teenagers who weren't even born during his peak years post his quotes under moody Instagram photos. And Alpo watches, always watches. Maybe he smiles, maybe he flinches. No one can say, but he keeps track of the culture that once celebrated him, the myths that grew around him, and the betrayal that still stains his name. Then one day he comes back, not in a blaze, not with cameras, but with presence. Word starts trickling through Harlem he's here, cruising through the old streets in a candy-colored Dodge truck, walking with that same deliberate stride, owning space like it still belongs to him. For many, it's unbelievable. Hadn't he vanished into some government safe house, or rotted in a cell on an island somewhere? A teenager's shaky phone video blows away the doubt. Filmed in the corner store parking lot, it shows him leaning casually against the truck, chatting, smiling like the streets never turned on him. The clip hits the internet and spreads like wildfire. And suddenly, the past stirs. The ghosts he left behind begin to rise. Fact, Alpo Martinez walked out of prison in 2015 after roughly 25 years inside. His location and identity were buried under the shield of the Witness Protection Program. Yet by 2020, here he was, in Harlem again. Many believe it was intentional, that he wanted eyes on him, wanted whispers in the air. So what was it? Redemption? Nostalgia? Or simply the pull of hearing his name on familiar corners again? Whatever the motive, hiding was no longer part of the plan. The old Alpo was awake, still sharp, still carrying the shadows of what he'd done. Driving that candy-red Dodge Ram through Harlem wasn't subtle, it was punctuation, a statement. Yes, it's me. And no, I'm not hiding. He parks in places where the ground remembers his footsteps, walks past bodegas that once fed his crew, crosses stoops where his name once rolled off tongues with either respect or venom. The skyline has shifted, but the pavement still hums with old stories. Some onlookers stare in disbelief, others turn away. Younger faces raised on second hand. Legends aren't sure if the man in front of them is the same figure they've heard about in rap verses and YouTube documentaries, or just an older man clinging to a ghost of his own making. But the ones who were there, they know. They remember the dirt bikes tearing through the streets, the sudden disappearances, the grin that sometimes hid steel behind it. They see him for what he is, not what the internet says. On the surface, he moves without fear, visiting old hangouts, eating in public, speaking openly, as if the years, the betrayals, and the whispers never touched him. But there's a current under all of it, a tension running like an invisible wire. His back always finds a wall. His truck is never parked the same way twice. His eyes sweep every room, because legends don't get welcomed home, they get MEASURED. DC isn't here in person, but its weight follows him like a shadow. The names he gave, the convictions his words secured, they still echo. Silk Perry sits behind bars. Others are still serving time connected to what Alpo unleashed. Harlem hasn't forgiven. It hasn't forgotten. It just hasn't had a reason to speak until now. One encounter breaks the stillness. Outside a bodega, he crosses paths with an old associate. Not a close friend, but close enough to remember. The man nods, no words, holding his stare for a beat too long. Alpo smiles lightly, keeps walking. Later that night, he changes locations again, because deep down, he knows the truth: there are no homecomings for men like him. Forgiveness doesn't live here. In Harlem, nobody returns to a standing ovation. You come back to debts waiting to be collected, to consequences that have been rehearsing for years. That's the backdrop. In the late 2010s and early 2020s, reports began surfacing: interviews, whispered confirmations that Alpo Martinez had slipped back into the city under his own name. By 1987, Harlem had become one of the most lucrative drug hubs in the entire city. Federal estimates suggested teenage crews like Rich and Alpo were pulling in 6 figures a month. Money brought power, but power drew enemies, even within their own circles. Small fractures began to show. Some blamed greed, others said it was ego. Whispers floated that Alpo suspected Rich wasn't splitting the profits evenly. Whether there was truth to it or not didn't matter. Perception ruled, and suspicion was a dangerous seed to plant. People still wonder if things might have turned out differently had they managed to keep their egos in check. Maybe they could have been remembered as Harlem's most unshakable team. But in the streets, success has a way of turning allies into rivals. Rumors started to wrap themselves around Alpo's mind. He caught small signs, or thought he did. Maybe Rich was making moves without him. Maybe loyalty wasn't as solid as it seemed. Or maybe paranoia was simply tightening its grip. Rich stayed steady, thinking long-term, focusing on the business. But Alpo started making foods like a man who wanted to win a chess game by setting the whole board on fire. The tension between them grew thicker. There were rides where they didn't speak a word, music filling the silence while the air seemed to hum with unease. They were no longer kids with big dreams. They were kings, and kings rarely share crowns gracefully. In the late 80s, Harlem was shifting fast. Money was changing everything. Neighborhoods, relationships, even the way people greeted each other. Friends spoke in shorter sentences. Smiles came with calculation. The higher you rose, the smaller your circle became. For Alpo and Rich, the success they had built so quickly began to feel like a tightrope. Every move was watched. Every absence was noted. The empire, dazzling on the surface, had cracks forming. Deep inside, Alpo's behavior shifted. He'd miss meetings, arrive hours late without warning, or not show up at all. When he did, he spoke louder, laughed harder, spent more recklessly. But behind his sunglasses, his eyes scanned constantly, as though he was searching for a threat he couldn't quite name. Rich, meanwhile, stayed locked on operations. His focus was scaling and stability, even talking about pulling back and investing in quieter ventures. Alpo nodded along to these plans, but his restless grin told a different story. He was addicted to the heat, to the chaos, to the blinding glow of living too fast. That difference in philosophy, that widening gap between them, was becoming impossible to ignore. One cold night, riding together in Alpo's prized car, the music turned low, the windows fogged from the winter air. Rich asked a question, strictly business, and the way that moment would unfold. Neither of them could have imagined how close they were to the breaking point. Something about a drop, a payment. Alpo doesn't answer right away. He just keeps staring through the windshield, the glow of streetlights sliding across his face. Then he says quietly, "You think I don't?" "No." Rich blinks, caught off guard. "No." What? Alpo smiles, but it's not the easy, charming, kind people are used to. This smile is tight, dangerous, the kind that lets you know the man in front of you is already 10 steps ahead, and that he knows exactly where your family sleeps at night. Nothing more is said, but from that night on, something shifts. Trust starts to fray, like an old shoelace pulling apart at the edges. Then Harlem gets hit with something no one sees coming. A shock that rattles the whole block. William Porter, Rich's younger brother, vanishes. Just 14 years old, smart, bright, and loved by everyone. One day he's laughing in the neighborhood, the next day he's gone. No ransom call, no sighting, nothing. The streets go quiet. Mothers lock doors earlier. Kids stop hanging out on certain corners. The air feels heavier. Rich takes it hard, harder than anyone can remember seeing him. He's not just grieving, he's off balance. His moves get messy, his eyes look empty. And Alpo, some say he offers help. Others claim he keeps his distance, not wanting to get pulled in. But those who really know the streets see something else. Alpo's smile disappears. By December 1989, the worst is confirmed. William Porter is found dead in the Bronx. Harlem feels the blow like a thunderclap. It's more than a tragedy, it's a turning point. For Rich, it's the beginning of a downward spiral. For Alpo, it's the start of decisions that will seal his fate. After William's death, something between them breaks for good. They don't fight in public. No shouting, no dramatic scenes. The split happens behind closed doors, in short, tense conversations no one outside will ever hear. Deals shift, alliances crack, and soon the names, Rich and Alpo, stop being spoken in the same breath. People still wonder, was William's death the final wedge, or just a reason for Alpo to do what he'd already been thinking? Maybe it's easier to blame the tragedy than to admit ambition doesn't need a trigger, just the right moment. And Alpo is already looking ahead to a future with no equals. Just opportunity, and the nerve to take it. The first sign of betrayal isn't shouting, it's silence. The kind that creeps in before dawn, when the streets are still and trust feels like a loaded question. Betrayal doesn't knock it. Slips in using the key you gave away months ago. Alpo's key to Rich had always been trust. Shared rides, late night laughs, a concrete kingdom they built together. But somewhere, that key turned cold. It opened doors labeled jealousy, suspicion, and the question that poisons everything. What if? One night, Alpo gets into a van. The ride is smooth, the interior quiet. Up front, a driver says nothing. In the back, Rich Porter, tired eyes, calm face. No yelling, no accusations. Just two men in a small space, their friendship folding in on itself. Whatever is said in that van is lost to time. People say the conversation was short, words tight with unspoken meaning. Then a gunshot, not in the chaos of a club parking lot, not on a busy corner, in a moving van, private, quick. That's how Rich dies. No final speech, no crowd, just Alpo, a trigger, and a choice that can't be undone. Later, Alpo tells the authorities he had no choice. Claims Rich was holding back money, that Rich was plotting against him, that betrayal had already begun. But no one can prove it. There's no evidence, only whispers and a body. When Rich's body is found, headshot wounds, dumped in the woods like a problem no one wanted to solve, Harlem freezes. The disbelief is instant. Not Rich. He was the golden boy. The one who smiled more than he shouted. The one who looked out for his people. The one with a little brother whose death still stung. Too many. Alpo didn't just kill Rich. He crossed a sacred line in Harlem's unspoken code. A line you don't cross, no matter the money. Back in his apartment, Alpo sits on the edge of his bed. He doesn't cry, he doesn't sleep, he just stares. Outside, the city hums. Sirens wail, horns blare, life keeps moving. But in that room, time stands still. The fallout begins. Friends vanish. Allies fade into the background. Drug crews shuffle. Territories change hands. Harlem absorbs the shock, but the whispers remain. Alpo did it, and he doesn't deny it. He keeps showing up in public. New clothes, same restaurants, like nothing happened. But he feels it. The silence around him is louder than applause. Rich Porter's funeral in 1990 draws a crowd that spills into the streets. Hundreds come, not just to mourn, but to see history turn. Everyone wonders the same thing. Why? Alpo stays away. In his absence, something inside him hardens. Not guilt, he doesn't carry that color. More like acceptance. He crossed the line. There's no return. He tightens his circle. Trust becomes a rumor he no longer believes. But one thing he can't shake. He's become a legend. And legends don't get to disappear. Even now, decades later, people still argue. Was it business? Personal? Fear? In Alpo's world, sometimes the only way forward is through someone else's ending. But Rich's ending will follow him forever, a shadow that doesn't fade. His name drags a weight through Harlem's streets. Not guilt, but consequence. Legacy. The kind you can't rewrite. The streets change. Corners that once welcomed him turn cold. Conversations stop when he walks in. Even in clubs, where his favorite tracks still play, the energy is off. He's tolerated, not celebrated. So, Alpo clamps down harder. The business keeps moving, though slower. Money still comes in, thick and sluggish, like blood in clogged veins. He starts cutting people off, avoiding risk, moving differently. Paranoia. Maybe. But in his world, paranoia is survival. He distances himself from the old crew, to many mouths and to many stories. He communicates through middlemen. Stops showing up in person. Touches product only when necessary. The flash fades. Daytime flashy cars disappear. Nights on bikes stay, but only in darkness. His clothes turn muted, though the jewelry remains. There's talk of apple core, maybe a safe house in the Bronx, maybe a stash spot. No one's sure if it exists. But the rumor that Alpo has a hidden room of names, numbers, and escape plans makes people uneasy. He likes that by the early 90s, the feds are closing in. Task forces in New York and DC ramp up surveillance. Alpo's name is on multiple lists. First it's quiet, agents asking around, low-level guys getting picked up. Then the pressure grows, surveillance vans, tapped phones, associates vanishing. One of his crew gets caught with a gun charge and can't make bail. Another disappears after being seen outside a courthouse. The game is shifting, and Alpo knows it. Here's the irony. Alpo didn't die hidden away in shame or locked behind bars. He didn't fade into irrelevance. He died moving through Harlem like he always had, visible, unafraid, convinced he was too big to fall. Some believe that was his intention all along. That maybe his return wasn't about reclaiming power, but about ending things on his own stage, under his own spotlight. The cleanup happened fast. His body was removed. The truck was towed. The street washed clean. The city's heartbeat returned to its usual rhythm, but something stayed behind. Not bloodstains or deep-regis memory. The kind that clings to barbershop walls and corner store conversations. His name is spoken differently now. Lower, slower, less swagger, more caution. Because his story, no matter how you frame it, remains a warning. It was never truly about loyalty or betrayal or survival. It was about what happens when you live long enough to see your own legend turn into something else entirely. That night, Harlem didn't roar, it didn't riot, it just continued breathing. Another night sliding into another morning. The bodega's lights flickered out. The last trains rattled underground. Somewhere, a fan hummed softly in a window. The air settled. And maybe, for the first time in decades, Harlem slept easier. But names like Alpo's don't fade into silence. They hang in the air long after the headlines cool. And the questions don't vanish either. Not about how he died, that's clear. Enough but about why he came back at all. In the weeks after his death, Alpo split into two figures in the city's memory. One was the young man who had once ruled Harlem's streets with confidence and charisma, racing dirt bikes down avenues, stacking gold chains, turning stairwells into boardrooms. The other was the man who returned when he should have stayed, gone, stepping into a story that had already been sealed. Now he's not a person so much as a prompt. Did you hear how he went out? I saw him once by the fish spot. My cousin swears he talked about writing a book, each telling adds something truth. Or fiction, it doesn't matter. In a strange way, that might have been what he wanted all along. To be remembered, to still be in the conversation. And in death, he is. Some say he came back to make amends, that walking those same streets in silence was a form of apology. Others think he couldn't stand the idea of being irrelevant, of existing. In the quiet, either way, Harlem has its answer now. The man is gone. The myth remains. And the story keeps moving, carried in whispers down the same streets where it began. Being invisible in Maine had felt like a slow kind of death, far heavier than any bullet. Still, most people who followed his story believed the end was written long ago. Not fate, exactly, but the closing of a circle that had been spinning since that van ride with Rich Porter. It raises the question, can time ever soften what betrayal turns to stone? The law speaks only in verdicts and files, never in legacies. The NYPD confirmed the name. The media replayed the headlines in neat packages. Former drug kingpin Alpo Martinez shot in Harlem. Clickable, shareable. Another story to scroll through. But for people who lived the noise behind the headlines, it wasn't just a story. It was memory. One man, now grown, wrote on his blog about how Alpo once handed him a crisp $100 bill on his 15th birthday, simply for holding open a door. I know what he did, he wrote, but I still remember that smile. And that's the tension. because Alpo always smiled, even when the room turned cold, even when his presence emptied spaces, the smile stayed. And that smile made people wonder, was it shamelessness, or was it hiding a sorrow too deep to show? In death, his name started reaching new ears. A younger generation, untouched by the scars of the era, began to discover him through grainy clips and chopped interviews. They printed his quotes on shirts. They laid his voice over trap beats. A myth regrew, piece by piece. To some, Alpo became ambition, a boy who built an empire before he could legally buy a drink. To others, he became warning proof of what happens when charm outruns conscience. But to Harlem, he was something else entirely. A scar, he represented the contradictions the city had lived through. Brilliance tangled with betrayal, love bound with violence, youth swallowed by ruin. His absence still hung in certain corners. Outside his old building, the silence felt heavy. In stairwells where his footsteps once echoed, there was only stillness. On the wall where Rich had once leaned, laughing, there was nothing now but quiet. For all the noise Alpo had carried in life, his echo was softer in death. Courtrooms that once held his name like a spark ready to burn grew silent. No more charges, no more witnesses. Only a closed file gathering dust in drawers few would ever open again. Yet outside the system, the trial never ended. It carried on in conversations, in group chats, on stoops under buzzing streetlights. Everyone had their own version. Some called him a snake. Some called him a genius. Some swore he got exactly what was coming. Others said he changed the game forever. This endless chatter followed him because he mattered. Maybe not for the right reasons, but still, he mattered. His power had always been forcing people to talk, whether they wanted to or not. The strange twist was that Alpo turned out to be louder in death than in life. While alive, you could watch him, gauge him, read the room. In death, he was uncontrollable, reshaped again and again depending on the storyteller. Podcasts began their multi-part breakdowns. Old associates stepped in front of cameras, some hiding faces, others proud to show them. YouTubers uploaded time with dark music and shaky photos. Journalists dug up old clippings, while rappers slipped his name into new verses. His ghost was noisy, and the courtroom of public memory was overflowing in upstate New York. A retired detective sat with his morning coffee, saw Alpo's face on the television, and muttered under his breath, "Should have stayed gone before," stepping into the snow. In Washington, D.C., a man who once rode alongside him clenched his jaw at the headline, saying nothing, carrying the weight of memories. And in Harlem, a young boy sped through an alley on his dirt bike, the same alley Alpo once used for practice getaways. The boy didn't know the full truth, only the outline, the silhouette. And that's what remains now. Shapes, the complete man, the facts, the pain all too complicated, too stained. So people reduce him to titles. The flashy kingpin, the betrayer, the charismatic hustler. Take your pick. That's the curse of becoming a symbol. Here's the twist: some still admire him. Not the betrayal, not the snitching, not the blood, but the hunger, the myth, the refusal to stay invisible. In a world where so many young men are unseen, Alpo demanded the spotlight. He forced people to notice. And maybe, deep down, he didn't want to live forever. Maybe he only wanted to be remembered louder than the silence he was born into. So is infamy a kind of immortality? The courts stopped asking, but Harlem hasn't. There is no verdict on a legend, only stories. and those stories are just beginning. Again, his shadow stretches across time like a mark that won't fade, not because people agree on who he was, but because they can't, and it's in that constant argument memory clashing with myth that he remains alive. You hear his name in barbershops, dropped casually in the middle of sports debates. Yeah, he was fast, but not Alpo fast. His name pops in lyrics, used by rappers who never met him but feel the weight of his reputation. His story sneaks into pauses when Harlem tales are told, because his legend is still wired through the city's streets like old cables. You don't see them, but when the lights flicker, you know they're there. Some try to polish the story. They say he was young, trapped by circumstance, just playing a game everyone else played. Others spit back. Don't excuse him, he killed rich, he chose his path. Then there are the quiet ones. They don't debate, don't defend. They sip coffee, shake their heads, and let the noise wash by, because they remember, and remembering is heavier than arguing. After his release, and especially after his death, Alpo became the subject of endless study. Academic papers, documentaries, sociological analysis, his stories stretched across classrooms and street corners alike. To some, he was a warning about ego and survival. To others, an example of how systems collapse when ambition meets corruption. What fascinated people most wasn't simply what he did, but how easily he moved through every chapter of life. Corner kid, dealer, kingpin, killer, informant, ghost, myth. He wore every version as if it had been tailored for him. The duality of Alpo Martinez isn't rare in history, but few figures have it so clear. His life was documented in full view, so public, so loud, that even his harshest critics pause and wonder, what exactly made him different? Some say timing. He rose at the moment Harlem was at war with itself, when cracks split families apart and turned friends into rivals. Others say it was his mouth Alpo. Didn't just move in silence, he moved with style, and he broadcasted everything. Even his betrayals carried showmanship, and that was Alpo's truth. He was never invisible, not in life, not in death. But death shifted the narrative. Death doesn't grant forgiveness, but it creates distance. It takes the noise, pushes it away, and leaves only the echo. Where once his life was an endless broadcast, now it feels like a parable, a tale told, in hushed tones, the kind that asks questions instead of giving answers. Who was he really? A genius who knew how to move pieces on the board before anyone else. A traitor who sold out the very system that built him. A victim of the same streets that raised him. Or just a man who could not find peace no matter how. Much money, fame, or survival he stacked around himself. Some swear he orchestrated everything, right down to his last chapter. That he knew legends don't get old. They don't fade away in quiet retirement. They vanish. They disappear just long enough for people to doubt, then return just long enough to remind the world of what they once were. Maybe he believed that was the only way to hold on to myth, to live forever in contradiction, and so the question lingers. Can a man really run from his own shadow if he is the one chasing it? Can you rewrite the end if you're the author of your downfall? Let the thoughts fade for a moment. Let the rumble of the city soften. Imagine the lights dimming across narrow streets and broad avenues. His story has been told, the rise into glory, the betrayal that shook circles to their core, the exile that turned him into a ghost, the sudden return that unsettled the calm. Now there is only silence. The quiet does not offer comfort, but it gives release. Because sometimes the most chilling part of a legacy is not the name itself, but the silence that spreads in its absence. Breathe deeply now, release the weight, pressing your chest. Let the corners of the city turn still. Let the late-night rhythm of Harlem slow to a heartbeat barely heard. The ghost has left, the story has settled, and at last, rest can take its place. Heat, heat that burned in his name. Heat that lingered in fear. Heat that refused to cool for decades. Heat that shaped every rumor, every headline, every whispered tale behind closed doors. Heat that drew people in, even as it destroyed them. Heat that clung to the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Heat that made him larger than life, hotter than myth, heavier than truth. Heat that doesn't fade quickly, but eventually, inevitably, drifts into the night. Heat, 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 heat. For someone in witness protection, anonymity is currency. But he tossed it aside, trading safety for familiarity. Some claimed it was nostalgia that pulled him back. Others swore it was the hum of Harlem itself, the rhythm he once walked to. Plenty believed it was simpler. He couldn't stand not being seen. Was this the swagger of a man finally at peace, or the last act of someone who refused to vanish into silence? He cruised the avenues in a truck that seemed more like armor than transportation. Tinted windows, reclined seat, music barely above a whisper. Sometimes he didn't even step out, just idled there. Eyes scanning the streets like he was reading a love letter written in chipped bricks and cracked sidewalks. One night, he stopped at a red light. Recognition sparked in a passerby's eyes. What happened next is murky. Voices raised, hands moved, but Alpo kept his gaze forward, silent. Later, he told someone close, "Harlem don't owe me, and I don't owe it. We're even, but Harlem doesn't balance its books that easily. Streets remember faces, but more importantly, they remember absences. Rich, William, dozens more. The code may be dressed in new slang, but its rules haven't aged. You don't betray the circle and expect to walk back in like a chair's been waiting for you. Sometimes ghosts aren't tied to places, they're tied to the pull of attention. Alpo's return wasn't a search for peace, it was about presence. A man who once had the city memorizing his every move doesn't retire into invisibility. He steps back into the frame, and even his quiet becomes loud. Yet the tone had shifted. Harlem no longer clapped for him. It watched. Curtains twitched when his truck lingered too long on a block. Conversations faltered when he stepped into a deli. Kids whispered to all the relatives, "Is that him?" The nods they got in return carried no warmth. He figured he could smooth it over. That charm could sand down the rough edges. He smiled like old times, swapped stories, laughed loud at memories no one else was smiling at anymore. He dropped bills in corner stores, tipped waitresses like they were family, and handed advice to younger hustlers as if he still wore a crown. But each exchange left the air colder. There are rules here. If you kill a prince, you don't get to rule again. Whether he'd admit it or not, he started adjusting, parking closer to exits, keeping the engine warm, avoiding names in conversation. Some days, a vest under his hoodie. Nights grew restless. The city's hum, once comforting, now carried something. Heavier and Rich's voice, more a reminder than an accusation, became a steady companion in his thoughts. This wasn't a comeback. It was an ending choosing its timing. Then came the signs. Tires slashed twice in the same week. A bottle hurled at his window. Someone shouting snitch across 125th Street. He didn't flinch. Walked slower, even. Calls came from unknown numbers. One text read, Not everyone's dead, Al. He didn't reply. This wasn't DC, where loyalty was transactional. Harlem's grudges grew roots. Legends here didn't fade. They lingered, sharpening. By 2021, he was out in public enough for people to talk. He was no longer a shadow in a witness protection file. He was flesh in motion. Why come back at all? Many concluded the quiet had been unbearable. Is that courage, recklessness, or just the inability to exist without an audience? Still, he stayed, visiting corners where deals were once sealed, parking outside buildings tied to his past, talking to the younger crowd with war stories stripped of moral lessons. One kid filmed him and posted it with the caption, "OG Alpo still out here. Harlem different." The clip spread fast, and somewhere in those viral ripples, Alpo seemed to grasp the truth. Legends thrive in absence. The moment you show up again, you stop being a story. You become a target. When he was gone, the city built him into a cautionary tale. Documentaries, whispers that don't end up like speeches. But now he was walking the same blocks where the ghosts still had addresses. Harlem had no interest in preserving myth. It wanted closure. Soon there were cars following him too long. Unfamiliar faces holding their gaze for just a beat past normal. A parked car with its lights off at 2 a.m., engine running. He knew that stillness. He'd invented it, but he didn't retreat. He leaned in. More public sightings. More long nights outside. Some claimed he was even planning interviews, maybe a memoir. Truth or bravado, it didn't matter. The possibility was enough to ripple through old crews, stirring wounds that had never really healed. The younger generation, raised on his legend, now had a chance to rewrite his ending. The feds watched. Too, knowing his presence stirred more than just neighborhood chatter. If someone made a move on him now, the aftermath could unravel years of legal work. Still, as long as he stayed just shy of trouble, they couldn't intervene. He seemed to understand the line, never crossing it but never stepping far from it either. Visiting buildings where he once paid rent in cash or in blood, he'd nod to familiar faces even when they looked through him. Some nights he'd sit in his truck for half an hour, staring at nothing in particular. People talked. One claimed they saw him crying alone. Another swore he was laughing into a phone, which was true. Maybe both. Maybe neither. In Harlem, myth and man rarely survive in the same body for long. Maybe it was both. Maybe it was neither. Maybe that was the truth of Alpo. He became whatever people needed him to be to keep the legend alive. Still, the tension was thick enough to taste. Those who claimed to be close to him of such people really existed whispered that the bulletproof vest had become part of his daily uniform. It wasn't for style anymore. It wasn't to impress. He was bracing himself, not for a date on the calendar, but for the inevitable moment. Then came Halloween. October 31st, 2021. A Sunday evening painted in crisp air and restless energy. The streets pulsed with kids in costumes, their laughter cutting through the hum of the city. Candy wrappers danced in the wind along the curbs. Somewhere, an old Big L track blasted too loud from an apartment window. Elsewhere, someone checked their door lock for the second time that night, and on Frederick Douglass Boulevard, Alpo was behind the wheel of his red Dodge Ram. The same truck, the same bold color. This time, there was no entourage, no crew riding shotgun, no cameras following him. Just Alpo alone, steering down streets that had once moved to his rhythm, like a monarch returning to walk his former kingdom. The shots came fast, 5 in total. No warning, no drawn-out confrontation, no movie scene standoff. just the sharp crack of gunfire, the shattering of glass, the crumple of steel. His body jerked with the impact, adrenaline colliding with pain. Bleeding, he tried to keep driving, pushing the truck forward on instinct alone. He made it a few blocks before the vehicle slammed into parked cars near 147th Street. The people who rushed to the scene later swore his eyes were still open, though the life had already gone out of them. History would record it plainly. On October 31st, 2021, Alberto Alpo Martinez was shot and killed in Harlem at the age of 55. A man who had walked into his past with eyes open, now permanently written into it. Some believe he knew the ending was coming, that his return to Harlem wasn't a miscalculation, but a deliberate farewell. In a city like this, nothing stays buried forever, not even the ghosts. The street where his truck came to rest doesn't look like a conclusion to a saga. Parked cars line the curb. Dim street lamps cast pale halos of light. A laundromat glows in the corner, its fluorescent buzz as steady as ever. But on that Halloween night, this ordinary stretch became the last paragraph in a story decades in the making. The truck's red paint was dulled by bullet holes and the muted shock of the crowd that gathered but didn't speak. Some claimed he reached for his phone. Others said he was gone before the vehicle struck the car ahead of it. The coroner's report confirmed multiple gunshot wounds to his torso and head. Even the vest he wore beneath his clothes made no difference. When your time is called, protection is just another layer for bullets to pass through. There were no murals, no candlelit vigils, no rallies in his name. Harlem reacted the way Harlem often does when a man who once betrayed its heartbeat is taken from it, let out a long, slow breath, one it had been holding since 1990. News of his death spread faster than anything could have in his prime. Social media flooded with post-tweets, videos, filtered images overlaid with captions that swung between shock and inevitability. Some wrote good riddance. Others, mostly younger voices who knew him from streaming documentaries rather than first-hand experience, typed out tribute to the fallen legend. But those who lived through the reality, who remembered Rich, the trial, and the years that followed, kept their silence. Because what was left to say? The king had returned, and history itself had dethroned him. No court, no lawyers, no deals. Just 5 loud truths and a final silence. Kids passed by without much thought, their footsteps blending into the city's rhythm. But if you pause, even for a moment, and let that quiet breathe, you'll notice something subtle. It isn't a voice or a scream, but more like a hum, as if Harlem itself exhaled and then remembered what silence feels like. You'd imagine that after everything that had happened, the city would move on quickly. But Harlem doesn't operate that way. This place isn't built for forgetting. It remembers differently through small glances. The way conversations shift, or how certain names create gaps in dialogue. That's why when Alpo returned, it wasn't just casual gossip that spread, it was the reopening of an old scar. The city reacted in the only way it knew, by watching the blocks where he parked, the diners where he sat down, the faces of people who still greeted him. Every nod was examined, every handshake measured, every exchange questioned. Because in a place where memory is currency, familiarity is dangerous. He tried to retrace old routes, rolling slow down avenues, his red Dodge Ram gleaming in the light like a warning. People didn't wave. Some nodded reflexively, maybe out of surprise, but very few reached out. He wasn't welcome, and he felt it. Yet here's the thing about Alpo: he didn't come back to be embraced. He came back to be noticed. Years as a ghost had eaten at him. Witness protection stripped him of everything: his name, his swagger, his Harlem. For Alpo, that was worse than death. So when he showed up again, it wasn't about safety or hiding. It was about resurrection. Let them look, let them whisper, let them wonder why he had the audacity to return. He carried it like a badge of honor. But Harlem doesn't decorate ghosts with medals. People still walked the same streets he once ruled, but they brushed past him. And when he spoke, he felt how shallow his words sounded. No echo, no weight. The young generation didn't know him. The older generation didn't forgive him. Legacy, it turns out, decays like everything else. By then, Harlem had shifted. Gentrification rolled in, smoothing the rough edges with coffee shops where corner stores once stood. Check-cashing spots gave way to boutique spaces. Rents climbed high enough to displace families who had been there for decades. Storefronts, selling candles of remembrance, were replaced by polished signage. And yet, through all the change, Alpo stayed the same. His stride, his smirk, his way of carrying himself was like a cassette tape that refused to stop playing, even when the speakers aged out. Until Halloween night, when the shots rang out and the Dodge Ram collided with another vehicle, there was a strange hush. The city froze. No sirens immediately, no screams, just a pause where Harlem seemed to understand that an era had ended. Many believe that's why there was no outcry. Harlem had already mourned him twice. Once when he killed Rich Porter. Again when he turned informant. This third time wasn't mourning at all. It was confirmation. So ask yourself, can a man be buried 3 times? Once by betrayal, once by prison, and once by his own decision to return. And even then, his story didn't vanish. His death did erase him. It only stripped away the question of permission. No murals appeared, no blocks renamed, no formal vigils covered by news cameras, just silence. People walked past the corner where it happened and nodded briefly. The way you acknowledge a sight that carries more meaning than words can show. Someone left a single rose beneath a street sign. No message, no signature, just the act itself. Maybe that was the purest tribute possible. Not forgiveness, not condemnation, but recognition. On the official record, it looked ordinary. 5 shots fired, 1 dead man. A red truck riddled with holes on Halloween night in Harlem. Another statistic among too many others. But everyone knew better. The newspapers knew, and the streets knew. This wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. This was a response 30 years delayed. The NYPD statement was brief. Headlines read, "Infamous Harlem drug lord killed in drive-by or former informant slain in his old neighborhood." The coverage hit loud for a moment, then faded quickly, like weather that changes overnight. But Harlem's air didn't clear so easily. When Alpo died, he left behind unfinished sentences. People went back to old conversations. Names buried for decades came up again, spoken with venom by some, nostalgia by others, and with conflicted awe by many, though he had been gone physically. He had never truly disappeared from their vocabulary. And now, in death, his presence seemed to grow stronger. The strangest part is, Alpo saw it coming. He didn't announce it in a final speech or write it down, but his movements gave it away. The way he revisited corners, staring at them like old companions. The way he studied the skyline, as if memorizing it. He wasn't looking for enemies anymore. His eyes weren't scanning for threats. They were holding to last glances. He knew. His body language admitted it, even when his mouth stayed closed. By then, speculation had already spread that he was violating witness protection. Authorities never confirmed if he was formally removed, but it didn't matter. He was using his real name, moving through Harlem without security, no disguises, no hesitation. That wasn't recklessness, it was a choice, and many believe it was intentional. So what do you think? Did he return because he thought he could outpace consequences, or because he was finished with running altogether? The night after his murder, the block was strangely quiet. No balloons tied to lampposts, no murals in chalk, no candles burning in rows, just hushed voices and tired eyes that had already seen too much. One long-time resident told a reporter that wasn't a killing. That was a response. And Harlem didn't argue, because in this city, memory moves in cycles. Rich Porter's name rose again in the aftermath. It became the louder eulogy, not Alpo's life, but Rich's absence. It was as if Harlem had been waiting 3 decades to grieve properly, and only now, after Alpo's death, could it finally exhale. Closure doesn't arrive with press conferences or official statements. It comes quietly, in space reclaimed. It comes when a name that once filled every conversation finally leaves room for others. And that absence makes its own sound, humming, like electricity in the air. In that way, Alpo returned as a legend, but departed, leaving silence. A silence that told everyone the streets have long memories and even longer patience. Afterward, Harlem didn't erupt in rage or song. It simply shifted slightly, as if releasing a breath it had been holding too long. The truck was towed. The blood was washed away. The media cycle moved on. But for those who lived under the weight of his choices, that silence was its own reckoning. In the days that followed, old faces started reappearing. People who had vanished for years now leaned against walls, stood in doorways, or sat on crates outside corner shops. Their voices were low, carrying stories that weren't about happy memories, but about breaking down the past, like examining a body. They spoke of choices made, people who disappeared, and where their lives had almost collided with Alpo's. Some carried relief on their faces, like survivors who had slipped past a storm. One man, whose name was never shared, leaned against a brick wall and admitted he wasn't supposed to still be alive. He said it with no drama, just plain truth, and those words stuck. If anyone understood the short lifespan of men who lived loud in quiet cities, it was Alpo. He wasn't only a hustler, he was one who talked too much, who smiled when silence might have saved him. He didn't come back to Harlem to hide or to slip into the shadows as a ghost. He came back as a reminder, a walking headline, a story told in real time. And maybe that was what the streets pushed away the hardest. Not only his crimes, not even his betrayal, but the way he performed it all. Harlem no longer wanted a stage play. It wanted rest. His presence was like turning on bright lights in a dim jazz club. It killed the mood. It stripped away the romance, exposed every wrinkle, and forced people to face what was gone instead of what might still be possible. Months after his murder, law enforcement gave nothing to the public. No arrests, no suspects, no clear motive. Silence hung in the air, louder than any statement. And for Harlem, that silence was the verdict. People believed that was the plan all along. There was no need for a courtroom trial, no jury, no conviction. Harlem didn't need paperwork, only needed an end. But what is closure really? Is it something a judge signs off on, or something the streets themselves decide? A year later, there were no plaques or murals, No premiers or shirts with his face. A few blogs remembered the date. Some podcasters retold his story. But Harlem didn't stop. Life carried on. Kids who never knew his name rode their bikes past the very spot he fell, and they didn't even slow down. No hesitation, no wait. And maybe that was the truest farewell of all. The empire Alpo once built was gone. The corners had new rulers now. The order of things had shifted. His name could still stir a reaction, but less than before. It now sounded more like a history lesson than a threat. In barbershops, when someone brought him up, the reaction was usually a shrug. Maybe a pause, followed by a quick warning. Don't. Be him. Don't try to be him. Because in the end, he wasn't victorious. He just lasted longer than expected. And when Harlem finally closed the book on him, it wasn't with affection, it was with finality. Alpo doesn't flinch. He's been in storms before. He knows when the air shifts, when the rules change, when it's time to move before the streets decide for you. His eyes turn south. Washington, D.C., not as an escape, not in his mind. Harlem will always be his home, but D.C. is possibility. Fresh corners, new rules. The hum of opportunity without the constant echo of old grudges. Some say he's running. He tells himself he's expanding. In his mind, this isn't flight. It's a business decision, a chess move. But the whispers in Harlem say otherwise. Fear wears many masks, and ambition is one of them. He doesn't take everything, just what counts. A few claim he left stacks of cash in some basement. Others tell stories of coded ledgers hidden in the walls of an apartment on 143rd Street. Maybe true, maybe not. With Alpo, the truth always stands on its tiptoes, swaying between one story and the next. He doesn't shake many hands before he leaves. One friend calls a final meeting on a rooftop. Alpo stared out the city, its lights flickering in the cold air, and said, "I'll be back only if I have to." No grin, no sorrow, just focus. Then he was gone. Harlem watched the space he left like a scar on a face impossible to ignore. DC greets him with a smirk, as if it's seen men like him before and already knows how the story will end. This city has its own rhythm, its own code, its own blood-soaked history of kings who rose quick and fell quicker. But Alpo doesn't arrive quietly. He comes in like a parade without a permit. Loud, shiny, impossible to miss. The streets feel him before they see him. New cars growl down Georgia. Avenue motorcycles roar like sirens. Jackets so fresh they still smell like the store. His name rides ahead of his product, slipping into conversations on corners, in barbershops, in back rooms. Some are curious, others are insulted. Who's this Harlem man acting like he wrote the rulebook? Alpo doesn't request respect. He walks into rooms as if it's already his. The same grin, the same polished bravado that once made Harlem pause now works on new soil. For a time, it gets him far. He links with local weight, Wayne Silk Perry. Silk doesn't waste words. His reputation moves faster than his voice. In DC, his name alone can end a conversation before it starts. Alpo sees the advantage. He's got the product, the network, the charm. Silk has the muscle, the fear factor, the unspoken authority to make problems disappear. Together they start shaping the city. Within months, the structure is tight. Runners, lookouts, safe houses, drop points scattered across neighborhoods. Profits surge. Some whisper about $1 million a month, maybe more. This time Alpo is sharper, smaller circle, fewer middlemen, more rules. It's not about friendship anymore. It's a machine, smooth. On the surface, grinding underneath. Enough glitter to distract from the gears. But DC isn't naive. The city's seen fast rises before. It knows gravity always waits. Murmurs start. Too flashy, too bold, too unpredictable. Even Silk's eyes start narrowing. One night word reaches Alpo. Someone close might be talking. Not street gossip, federal talk. The kind that burns entire empires down to ash. He doesn't take it lightly. Trust fractures. Every face becomes a maybe. DC tightens its jaw. In the early 90s. The capital is already boiling. One of the highest murder rates in the country. Much of it tied to the drug trade's endless feuds. Alpo steps into that chaos like a spark in dry grass. His answer to suspicion is the only one he trusts. Fear. Enemies vanish. Associates disappear. It's no longer about deals. It's about control. Control in DC means sending messages. Someone hesitates. Gone. Someone comes back short. They don't come back at all. It's a pattern no one can miss. What was once business becomes rule. By elimination, the partnership with Silk begins to fray. It was never built on trust, and now cracks widen. Silk hears the same whispers everyone else does, that Alpo's thinking differently, moving differently, maybe even looking his way. In a city like DC, when someone like Silk starts to feel uneasy, the streets go on alert. They don't break. Openly, no shouting, no threats in public. Just slow shifts, missed calls, delays, short answers where there used to be nods. The kind of distance you feel more than you see. Still, Alpo keeps the performance alive. The rides, the clothes, the spectacle. One night he rolls up to a club in a custom motorcycle jacket laced with actual diamonds. No rhinestones, just step inside, give a single nod, and walk back out. It's not for applause, it's to remind everyone he's still here, but myths grow faster than means. Behind the scenes, federal agents are stacking paper, photos, maps, phone logs, names connected by red string. Every trip, every flash, every call documented. The Harlem chapter is legend. The DC chapter is evidence waiting for a judge's signature. Inside the crew, tension hangs like smoke. People feel the eyes on them. Not just from rivals, but from buildings without windows, from cars that don't move. Alpo says he's fine, says he's in control. But the list in his head, the one names, the one no one's allowed to see, keeps getting longer. He rides alone more often now, switches apartments, uses fake names. Sometimes the only sound in the room is the hum of the fridge and the weight of his own breathing. Nights feel heavier when the noise fades. Control is slippery. Hold it too tight and it bleeds through your grip. Loosen it and it's gone. In DC, Alpo still holds on, but the edges are fraying. The empire is bigger, the shadows are longer, and the silence around him is growing. He starts to notice it in subtle ways, the glances that linger a bit too long. The same question repeated with a forced laugh, the uneasy smiles that show too much teeth. Something in the air shifts. People he's known for years begin to move differently. He clocks every change, storing each interaction like evidence in his mind. Now, every talk feels like a test. Every handshake hides a question. Trust isn't just gone. Tiff feels like something from another lifetime, an artifact he can only remember. Never touch. Still, he keeps moving. Caution becomes his closest companion. He switches locations often, never letting one address feel lived in. Phone numbers get swapped out like fresh laundry, never used long enough for anyone to get comfortable. By the door, three outfits stay folded and ready, each one picked for disappearing quickly. This isn't just paranoia anymore, it's procedure. And maybe, just maybe, that's the only reason he stays ahead for as long as he does dot reality outside. His circle is changing too. In the early 1990s, the FBI and D are no longer just running cases. They're running coordinated takedowns across major US cities. Networks that once felt untouchable are being torn apart piece by piece. And Alpo Martinez, he's on their list near the very top. His reach from New York to DC makes him more than just a name. They see him as a keystone in a larger empire they want dismantled. Month by month, his file grows thicker. The night everything shifts doesn't start with flashing lights or sirens screaming through the dark. It starts with the face of someone he once trusted, now sitting across from federal agents. One of his own decides to talk. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's leverage, maybe it's just survival. Whatever the reason, the result is the same. A quiet, calculated betrayal that moves like poison through everything he's built. Alpo doesn't know it yet. He's still making plays, still thinking his shadow can stretch farther than any badge. Until the law finally reaches out not with a warning, but with a stack of paper. Arrest, conspiracy, murder, multiple counts. It happens fast, though not so fast that it truly shocks him. Deep down, some part of him had been bracing for this. You could see it in the way he'd been carrying himself lately, slowing down his entrances, letting his laughter fade quicker, keeping his jacket zipped high like he was already preparing for cold steel against his wrists. People still argue about it. Could he have run? Did he have the time, the means? Or was the past finally closing in, moving faster than he could? When they take him in, it's quiet. No shootout, no engine roaring down back streets. Just handcuffs. A closed door, and a sound that feels heavier than it should. For the first time in years, he says nothing. There's a strange silence that follows him into the cell, not calm, not peaceful, but the quiet after a blaze has burned out. When the smoke still hangs and no one knows how much damage has been done, he sits like he's waiting for an appointment, not like a man who's just been stripped of everything. His eyes trace the walls, as if measuring them, already mapping angles, rehearsing words for conversations that might never happen. The paperwork arrives like stacked bricks. Drug trafficking, racketeering, murder, the weight of decades in ink. He doesn't flinch. Not on the outside. Maybe not even on the inside. Because somewhere deep, he always knew the game ends one of two ways. And this was one of them. But prison is a different kind of battlefield. The tailored jackets, the roaring motorcycles, the crowd that once parted when he walked in there. Gone. Here, everything is metal edges, hard voices, and rules written into the walls. And yet, even in this place, his name doesn't vanish. It circulates in whispers. The red Dodge Ram that carried him through his last moments was gone. The street had been cleaned. Yet the afterimage still lived inside Harlem, like an echo of a gunshot no one heard, but everyone could feel. And in that echo, a strange quiet took hold, not peace, not justice, just the dull absence of noise. In a city that prides itself on memory, forgetting became its own decision, and slowly it began to happen. Alpo's story didn't vanish. It drifted. Not gone, but carried further from the center of things, like smoke thinning in the air. A few blocks away from where it ended, a young boy leaned against the stoop, phone glowing in his hand, scrolling, swiping, bored. He stopped when he stumbled across an old clip. It was Alpo talking in an interview recorded years ago. The video was grainy, pixelated, the sound faint. But there he was live again, grinning, explaining himself to an unseen audience. For a brief moment, the boy watched, not knowing the full story, not feeling the weight of it. Just another clip in the endless stream. And that was the irony. A man who once held Harlem in his grip now existed fragments of faded memories, whispered warnings, and short clips online. His power had turned into pixels. His voice was no longer command, but just background noise, swallowed by the scroll. That was how Harlem moved on. Not with parades or anger, not with cheers or tears. It moved on by folding him into its history. Then setting him aside, his name was still there, but it no longer ruled the corners. The streets had found new stories, new rulers, and new lessons. And for Alpo, the goodbye wasn't loud. It wasn't a song or a scream. It was the silence of bicycles rolling past without pause, of conversations that ended with a shrug, of history drifting like smoke into the air. The block had decided. The city had completed the story. And in the end, that was the only closure Harlem ever needed. The man leans back with a grin, telling a story that sounds almost unreal. His voice carries energy, and the kid in front of him listens, half laughing, half puzzled. To the kid, it feels like any other clip online, just another wild story from someone larger than life. He doesn't feel the danger, doesn't carry the weight of history. To him, it's entertainment, something like a movie scene. That's how the shift begins. Alpo Martinez, once a real man walking Harlem streets, is slowly being shaped into something else. His story isn't staying grounded, in fact it's turning into legend. Just like old names from the past, Billy the Kid, Jesse Jamesman, who lived fast, died quicker, and became remembered more for the myths than the truth. Alpo's image starts to blur. The rough edges of his life get softened. The violence, the betrayal, the choices, they fade. What remains is a smile, a style, a reputation polished by retelling. Time has a way of sanding down memory. What once brought pain starts sounding almost poetic when spoken years later. His smile no longer looks tragic, it becomes iconic. But not everyone lets that happen. There are still men, older voices from Harlem who were there. Street historians, survivors of that time. They won't allow him to be remembered as just a folk hero without the cost being mentioned. When kids tell the story wrong, they step in. When someone glamorizes too much, they lean forward and remind them, don't forget the blood, don't forget the families, don't forget the cost. That balance is always there. Half legacy, half ledger. Harlem carries it daily. There's another side to him, too. A quieter piece of the story that gets lost. In the noise, a few years before his return, people had spotted him far from Harlem. He was wearing biker gear, helmet pulled down, visor covering his face. No smiles, no words, just movement. A blur on the highway, nothing more. For some time, that was how people pictured him hidden, faceless, slipping through other towns. Story put on pause. But Alpo wasn't a man who could stay paused forever. He came back. Not just with his body, but with his presence, his story. He couldn't let silence be the last chapter. Some people believe that was his biggest mistake. A man who outlived the streets, who escaped betrayal, who faced the feds and walked out of a courtroom. Liv decided to return to the very block that had never forgotten why. That's the question. Was it pride? A refusal to be erased? Was it nostalgia, the pull of Harlem itself? Or maybe he knew that if he didn't step back onto that stage, his story would be written without him. Perhaps he wanted to close the book where it started. Whatever the reason, Harlem didn't stop. Buildings aged, fresh paint covered all walls. New kids were born who didn't know his face. The city pulsed forward, always hungry, always alive. But still, in certain corners, if you look long enough, you can feel pieces of him. You see it. In the young kid flying down Lennox on a dirt bike, wheel lifted high in the air. You see it in the man fixing his gold chain in a shop window reflection. You hear it in the silence between two names, Rich Porter and the one who followed. The myth survives, even when the man does not. Alpo Martinez is going not just from life, but from the script he once wrote so boldly. Harlem feels emptier without him on its stage. The echo remains, but the body has left. His story isn't sitting neatly in a grave. It's scattered across whispered retellings on street corners. Scattered in folded yellow newspapers tucked in drawers. Scattered across shaky YouTube documentaries stitched together with grainy footage and heavy narration. It lives in rap verses from men who never shook his hand but felt the weight of his name. His memory shows up in casual talks, in the background of conversations where betrayal and ambition are spoken in the same breath. Alpo doesn't walk Harlem streets anymore, but his shadow sometimes does. It flickers when people argue about him, when young ones romanticize his name, when old heads shut down with hard truths. He lives in the contradictions, hero and villain, legend and criminal, survivor and target. Harlem remembers him both ways, and maybe that's the only way it can. He became a figure bigger than himself, both celebrated and cursed. And now, years after his fall, Harlem is still deciding what to do with him. Do they bury the man completely, or let the myth breathe? The answer never stays the same. Each retelling adds or removes a piece. Each generation chooses what part to carry forward. For the young, he's a character fast life, fast cars, flashy smile. For the old, he's a memory heavy with consequences, names and graves. Between those two, his story keeps moving, like a shadow that refuses to stay still. And that's what Harlem lives with. A man who became a myth. A myth that became a warning. And a warning that still rides its way through the streets, in whispers, in nods, in echoes. The stage might look empty, but the story hasn't ended. Because in Harlem, some names don't die. They split. One part becomes legend, told with a grin. The other stays ledger, carried with silence. Alpo Martinez is both, and maybe that's the truest ending he could ever have. He still lingers in memory, moving like an old wound that refuses to heal, sharp enough to sting, heavy enough to press on the chest. Sometimes when you think of him, he is locked forever in a single frame, a half laugh, a half truth, a test of loyalty that nobody wanted to fail. He lived on the edge of control, never steady, never calm, but always dangerous. That grin he wore, bent and permanent, seemed carved into his face, as though life itself had sewn it there. Once, the name itself could clear out an entire room. Now it doesn't make people scatter, but it does make them pause. It drags the air down like a scar. Everyone notices, but nobody wants to ask about in Washington. There are still whispers, quiet voices from the ones who saw him rise and lived long enough to see him fall. People who fled to new cities, who watched entire crews vanish into thin air, learned quickly that staying too close to his world meant disappearing too. Those who survive don't like to stretch his name too far into a conversation. Too many ghosts cling to it. Too many untold stories still hover, unspoken, heavy, choking the throat before a word can be finished. Harlem feels different. There, silence has taken the shape of finality. The block where the truck once smashed into metal glass no longer carries a sense of tragedy. There's no memorial, no wreaths, no candlelight vigils burning into the night. Life filled the gap with ordinary noise, the hum of cars pushing through the avenue, the sound of children chasing a bouncing ball until it smacks hard against a wall, the chant of someone calling out prices for incense on the corner, the scrape of a broom dragging grit across cracked pavement as a man sweeps with focus, like he can erase history one motion at a time. Harlem didn't need a shrine, didn't need an endless reminder of him. Harlem needed space. It needed quiet. Not the justice of courts, not the conclusion of books, just absence. For years his story was everywhere, stretching across boroughs, cities, states. His name was the anthem of hustlers, the excuse of dreamers, the warning of parents, the fascination of kids too young to know better. He was not one thing, but many. A contradiction with flesh and blood, a figure in designer belts, diamond chains, and bulletproof vests. He was the proof that power could come from fear, the proof that betrayal could be rewarded, and the proof that charisma could mask 1,000 sins.